Hey, good evening. It's a little after 6, so I think it might be a good time to get things started for tonight. Uh, Thank you for joining us for this conversation on New York City greenways. My name is John Scatino, and I'm a member of the AIA New York Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. This program is being co-hosted by our committee and the American Society of Landscape Architects. I'd like to note before we really get rolling that the AIA New York Transportation and Infrastructure Committee meets online monthly. All of our meetings are open to the public and listed on the calendar on the AIA New York website. So if you find tonight's discussion to be stimulating, we invite you to join us online for our next committee meeting, and that'll be coming up this Thursday, the 27th. In terms of housekeeping for tonight, this event is a hybrid program taking place in Manhattan at the Center for Architecture, right here, and also via live streaming. If you are joining us remotely, please know that during the program, online audience members will be on mute. However, questions can be submitted online through the Q&A link on your screen. Please feel free to address questions to individual speakers or to the group. Over the course of the evening, we'll collect your questions, and in the concluding Q&A, we'll try to respond to as many of those questions as possible. We have a lot on tap for this program. So to try and keep on schedule, we're not going to recite the bio of every participant who's here tonight. However, on screen, you can see the complete list of our speakers and panelists and a QR link that will connect you to the bios for all of our participants. Just use your phone to scan the link, and you'll be able to read up on the backgrounds of each of our guests who's here tonight. We are very grateful to have this distinguished group with us tonight, and we thank them in advance for sharing their time and their expertise. In terms of tonight's agenda, we'll begin with a brief historic overview of New York City greenways and a summary of their present context. Then we'll look at case studies, including Harlem River Bronx Greenway and East Harlem's Bobby Wagner Walk. And finally, we'll conclude with a panel discussion between all participants and an audience Q&A session. One of the prompts for this program was the announcement last fall of the city's Greenway expansion plan. Until now, our Greenways network has been somewhat fragmented and marked by a widely varying state of repair. On the left side of this slide, you can see a recent New York City Greenways Coalition assessment of network connectivity and conditions. That network assessment is accompanied on the right with a diagram showing the city's proposed Greenways expansion plan. In addition to showing routes, both diagrams have been overlaid here with heat maps showing medium household incomes, with the brightest sections indicating the highest incomes. These overlays of routes and income illustrate how clearly the city plan is focused on underserved communities. That reflects the core goal promised in the city's announcement of the plan, a focus on historically underserved, lower-income communities that lack access to affordable transportation and job opportunities. It's a statement of intent that offers real encouragement for the future of city greenways and the city. That said, it is important to acknowledge that while mapping geography and income can help identify disparities, it's also a broad brush picture that only shows where money is or isn't. It doesn't begin to provide the kind of critical insight needed for a more complex picture of who benefits from greenways and how. The subtitle of this program, Paths to an Equitable Citywide Network, points to how we hope an equity-based perspective can move tonight's discussion beyond sweeping notions of greenways as an uncomplicated public good. Indeed, along with the wealth of benefits, there are also predictable impacts and externalities that accompany greenways when they come online in underserved communities. So with that in mind, for city greenways, what could a long-term sustainable commitment to equity look like? In 2023, the Urban Land Institute issued a report that was commissioned by the Brooklyn Greenways Initiative. This document was also an early touchstone in the development of tonight's program. I want to spotlight a quote from that report that really gets to the heart of Greenways projects as deeply collaborative commitments. When considering what equity means in the context of Greenways, the report notes that given the fraught racial history of land use and real estate development and the intentional exclusion of marginalized people from the benefits of developments in the past, it will be critical to now prioritize the participation, perspectives, and goals of lower income and marginalized neighborhoods into greenway planning, design, construction, and operation. So tonight, some of the questions we hope to examine go beyond the purely technical aspects of planning and design to ask, how does the lived experience of community members get centered in this work? How is community retention built into Greenways projects? How are strategies for equity embedded in every phase of a project, including in the post-delivery long-term operation and maintenance of these new public assets? To get us started, our first guest is going to begin by framing some key concepts around what comprises and defines a greenway, and then briefly lay out a history and context for greenways in New York City. So with that, would you please welcome Hunter Armstrong, Executive Director of Brooklyn Greenway Initiative, and his Greenway colleague, Edmundo Martinez. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Big thanks to everyone for being here tonight, and to the AIA for hosting this, and the AIA's Transportation and Infrastructure Committee for organizing this, especially Gentry, Jim, and John. I'm Hunter Armstrong with Brooklyn Greenway Initiative and the New York City Greenways Coalition. So first we want to start to kind of lay the groundwork for our talk to discuss what is the definition of a greenway, what is a greenway, and depending on where you are in New York City and which agency creates, designs and builds a greenway, they can take many forms. So we have a few representative photos here showing different forms of greenways. So one definition of a greenway, this is from legislation that was passed in 2022, which we'll talk about more in the rest of this evening. The legal definition of a greenway as per City Council in their legislation. And this is a lot of text to read on a slide, so we won't linger on this too long. But I'll just note that there's no reference to equity or kind of protection of users in this legal definition. Another definition that we have is from an RFP that the City of New York released in December 2022. Again, we'll be discussing that throughout the course of this evening. An RFP that will be planning and designing and helping create a citywide greenways plan throughout the course of this year. So I have highlighted certain phrases here just for emphasis. So this is another more lengthy definition of a greenway, as well as the East Midtown Greenway, a different type of greenway. I think a very simple definition of a greenway can be linear corridors that connect communities with space for runners and walkers, space for cyclists and people on other wheeled vehicles, space for green, all protected from automobiles. The New York City Greenways Coalition, which Edmundo and I and 45 other organizations are part of, have met to discuss kind of our vision for an equitable greenway system. So these statements are a result of an exercise that we went through last year to kind of define our vision for an equitable greenway system. And I'll just, again, I've highlighted certain phrases here for emphasis, and I'll read some of them to you. Accessible for all ages and abilities, for different mobility needs. connecting to neighborhoods, lifting communities that have been left behind or experienced disinvestment. So again, really incorporating equity into this cause. Also, to give context for the rest of the evening and the case studies and the panel discussion, we'd like to talk about, just set a little bit more of the context for greenway planning in New York City and how the city has been at the cutting edge of greenway planning for a long time, and we hope to continue to be. In fact, the first cycleway, first kind of dedicated bike path, was Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn, designed by Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux as part of their vision for a greenway system or parkway system in Brooklyn connecting to Prospect Park. So this, of course, shows Ocean Parkway in use. Moving on to the 1930s, another big moment for the construction of greenways was the administration of Robert Moses, who of course is well known as a major highway builder in New York City and really across the state. And many greenways that we use now and parks that we enjoy were constructed, built as part of the large highway construction plan that happened under Moses's administration. Moving on to a couple other kind of key notable times in this timeline. In 1993, there was a greenway plan for New York City created by the city of New York. That is the last time that the city has had kind of a dedicated citywide greenways plan. So this was a plan for 350 miles of greenways. I think there has been some sort of criticism of this plan in the interim as not sort of reaching its full potential. This plan left a little detail about right-of-way planning and design, funding and maintenance. And so often development of greenways has been incorporated into utility upgrades of roadways, thought of as kind of finishes for these projects that were very much focused on something else. Moving ahead into the 21st century, I think there was a large focus on developing plans for individual greenway segments, which are listed here. A large number of greenway plans that were developed. Shifting into 2019 and beyond, there was kind of a larger focus and emphasis on focusing on a citywide network, starting with the Green Wave plan by the City of New York, listing greenways as the backbone of a citywide system. Moving ahead into more recent years, through the work of the New York City Greenways Coalition, we advocated for legislation requiring an update to the citywide greenways plan, which had not been updated since 1993. So that will be completed at the end of this year. Another notable moment is the federal grant that the city has received for $7.25 million through USD DOT RAISE program. So we'll be talking about that more tonight. And now I will hand things over to Edmundo.
Awesome, thank you. Oh, I skipped that way? I skipped that way to the right? Yes. Awesome. Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Edmundo. I'm a community member in the Bronx. I'm involved in a lot of different projects and orgs focused around greenways and parks, but I'd always like to lead off with the fact that I'm a community member first before all of that. I'm going to be super brief. A lot of the stuff that I'm going to share and talk about is definitely like simple Google search, and I'm going to be brief so that we can have some conversations and time later for the Q&A, because for me, that's the most important part of having these kind of things, not just us talking to y'all. So here's some of the projects of the Greenway development. Some of the current challenges that greenways have is it's disconnected. You often can't get to everywhere you want to go. Oftentimes, especially in the lower income neighborhoods, it leads to nowhere. You might get a couple of miles here and it don't really go. There's been vast improvements. It's definitely gotten better over the last decade or so, but it's still not fully connected to everywhere you want to go. Greenways tend to be multi-jurisdictional. You'll have one area where you have 3 or 4 different agencies that are in charge of what's happening there, which then causes a backlog. Then you have other agencies that are responsible to handle those communications, and those tend to get lost as well. The pandemic and COVID didn't help with that at all. However, it did help that things went virtual and was able to communicate with people. Legacy greenways are in desperate need of repair. Obviously, we have some greenways that are very, very much being paid attention to. Bronx River, they have an org who focuses on it. But areas like Pelham Parkway, been around for a long time. Mushulu Parkway, been around for a long time. With the new construction, maintenance tends to kind of fall behind. Unsafe, needed to turn into, so there's a lot of areas that are basically designated greenways, but it's mostly paint on the floor, as Hunter stated earlier, isn't fully protected by cars, isn't away from cars, I should say. There's a lot that can make it much safer when you're talking to community members and you're asking them, what can we do to get you on the bike? People feel they don't feel safe. So we can address the safety issues. You get more people, thus a more robust network eventually. And the quick building of greenways lack greenery. There's a lot of areas where you're riding and you just don't want to ride there, whether it's because you don't feel safe or super industrial, but you're not really incentivized to ride there. You might end up riding somewhere else that doesn't necessarily have the same type of green that you expect when you hear the term greenway. So the New York City Greenways Coalition formed in early March of 2021. It kind of came together, led by BGI, bringing groups to focus on these funds and how can we get some attention here in New York City to really capitalize on a moment that we might not see for another generation. Later that year, that following year, we had a summit, which right here in this space actually, which was really good. We were able to have some really good conversations, and it was a lot of work done that's kind of led us to where we at now. 45 members and plus. We focus on the Greenway early corridors, outreach and planning, some of the images that you saw earlier, equity and communications, and policy and planning to see how can we try to stay ahead as all these projects happening and with a focus on how we get them to community members. Here's some of the timelines, some of the stuff we've done. I'm rushing through because my time's up, but I want to make sure we have time for later. All right, so the ULI report came out. It was a really helpful report. It kind of highlighted and gave us some of the guiding principles that we already kind of knew and understood. Some highlights that I'll give you: design guidelines, especially design guidelines that focus on maintenance, different ways to have funding, diverse types of funding. For instance, like how do you, when you have this funding, build in the maintenance aspect of it, as well as creating public-private partnerships that can help kind of move some of these things along that might require corporate support. And as well as roles, how do roles play for organizations, community members, agencies, and then making sure that all these folks are having one unified voice when they are having these kind of conversations. So, yeah, that's me. I'm up to my part. I'm handing it over to you, right? Awesome.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mitchell Loring. I'm a project administrator for planning and policy at New York City Parks, and I'm joined by my 2 City Greenways team's colleagues here, Ted Wright from DOT and Lena Ferguson from New York City Economic Development Corporation. We're really glad to be here to share some progress that the city's making on expanding the network. First, I'll just give you a really quick overview of the slight differences that our agencies have as far as management of the network. DOT, of course, is responsible for the city's streets, the bike lanes on those streets, specifically those that are categorized as greenways, because it's not all of them. Parks manages our open space, natural areas, recreation areas, some of which have the city's, in my opinion, most scenic and safest greenway paths. And then EDC really helps the city implement big impact projects like transforming our waterfronts into whole new neighborhoods where we can integrate greenways, street networks, open spaces from the start. We all have slightly different responsibilities in the network, but together we are working very collaboratively as the city's Greenway team, specifically for a large citywide planning process that Ted's going to talk about in just a second. And Hunter actually went over several definitions that guide what a greenway is. I'll hit it again just really quickly from our city perspective. Continuity is key, used for both transportation and recreation, used by multiple different modes: cyclists, walkers, joggers, assisted mobility devices, strollers, everything that isn't, a vehicle that you need to register and drive in traffic lanes. And so with that, Ted is going to walk us through our current expansion planning.
Hello all, Ted Wright, New York City DOT. The first thing that I wanted to say, it's already been mentioned, but the reason why we're here today is we got a whole bunch of money, $7.25 million for planning alone, which is a lot. It's an ability to get a lot of staff, and it's kind of what we're doing today, what you're going to see. I'll show my side from DOT. Number one, what RAISE grants are allowing us to do is develop an overall greenway plan. I'm going to show you something about that in a second. And then implementation plans. That's how DOT operates. And I'll also show you that. Let's keep going. Oh, I can press it. Oh, here we go. Sorry. All right, I'm actually going to lean back so I can talk to this. Can you guys all hear me? Are we okay from a mic perspective? Somebody tell me if we're not. All right. So the overall Greenway plan, here's the fun part about being a bureaucrat at the city. We have at DOT thousands and thousands of miles of streets. What we've done recently with bike lanes in particular, and now greenways, is organize them and make sure we're keeping updated on them. We actually have to do a pretty good job. We have to make sure that they're plowed with DSNY. We have to make sure that they're repaved. So basically what's happening with this RAISE grant, first of all, is we're looking at all of these things, the greenway names, past greenway plans, greenway projects, greenway, and we're integrating them into the bike network, which is also part of our street network. Not particularly sexy, but actually kind of important if you think about it from the maintenance side of things, from getting funding, et cetera. This is a number. Hunter showed you guys a map. It was a schematic map. If you looked over in Whitestone, Queens, the line gets a little bit wavy. We didn't know how many greenways we have in the city. Last time we were here, we talked about 400 miles. Now we actually know how many miles of greenways we have. Doesn't mean much else other than that, but that's a big step because now we can start talking about maintenance. Implementation plans. This is the part of my job that I love, and I'm going to show you with a case study later, but we chose 6 different implementation plans. They are these, all really cool. Staten Island, I'm not going to go into it, but there's lots of pictures, and you guys can ask us about them later. DOT is a very special, out of everybody else, we all have our concentrations. DOT is very special in the fact that we can change roads. If I go to your community board, I can put a bike lane right out here. We can remove the parking. We did it a few years ago, just right over here, north of, I think it's Great Jones Street, I believe. And we put down a bike lane. Here, this is where it starts getting more fun. You can start putting them in places like, somebody switched out the map on me. This is Pattergate Avenue, right here. We basically had no bike lanes. This is East New York. It's Canarsie Park. Actually, it's technically Canarsie. But what we were able to do was like, all right, this road's too wide. Let's see if we can build out this bike lane here that gets people to the park, and then people start to understand this as part of the city. That's the coolest part about Greenways, from my perspective. It's not a stagnant park. It's not a big development project. It is a link, and that's something that all the 30% of the land in of city in New York that DOT controls, we can actually do something about. Where does it go from there? We oftentimes, Kent Avenue is what you see first. Then we end up building them out in Kent. Sometimes they stay capital, sometimes they stay as markings. And then sometimes they get integrated in huge projects. This is Red Hook, post Sandy. I don't even know how much money they're spending on it. It's insane though. With that, I pass it over to Lena.
Yeah. Thanks. Ted just talked about the implementation plans and the citywide Greenway plan that we're working on. The other piece of the RAISE grant is a long-term citywide expansion planning effort. That's the RFP. that Hunter mentioned in his remarks. It's going to build upon both the existing and planned Greenway network and those implementation plans to identify, prioritize, and then study potential future Greenway segments and projects. Basically, what comes next at a citywide level with a focus on equity and expanding the network. We're envisioning that the planning effort is going to accomplish the following. To compile actionable and forward-thinking best practices about the impact, design, and management of the next generation of greenways, to use physical, socioeconomic, and other data to conduct a citywide opportunity analysis for new greenways, and then develop a framework to equitably prioritize them, and then create feasibility plans for a few of them that we've prioritized most highly so that we can gain the information that we need to take them to the next level. We'll be conducting stakeholder and community engagement throughout that process to guide our work, and we'll compile it all into a report that'll be made public at the end of the process. What you see on this slide is planning work that our 3 agencies did together in 2018 to identify and study feasibility for the remaining gaps in the Manhattan Waterfront Greenway, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail later on during the case studies. This study led directly to further funding for design and construction of those gaps. Obviously, the scale is quite different. We're talking a borough versus a city, but the process of identifying and then conducting feasibility so that we can take them forward is similar to what we'd like to do here in the citywide effort. We're planning to begin it later this year and estimate it'll take about 18 months to complete. And I think I'm passing back for our first case study on Bronx Harlem River back to Mitchell.
All right, so we have 2 case studies. This first one has 2 parts to it. These 2 projects are connected to each other and both on the Bronx side of the Harlem River. So the first project I want to talk about is Tibbetts Brook Daylighting. This is a really big, exciting project. It's a partnership between Parks and DEP, and it's going to do 2 big things. First, extend the Putnam Greenway. Second, it's going to build New York City's largest green infrastructure project that's going to have a very large impact on water quality in the Harlem River. The photo on the right here is an abandoned railroad right-of-way in Kingsbridge that was formerly owned by CSX Railroad, and before that, it was operated as the Putnam Railroad, which back in the 19th century, early 20th century, ran from 155th Street and 9th Avenue in Manhattan, crossed over to the Bronx, ran north through the Bronx, through Van Cortlandt Park, and up to Putnam County, further upstate. It's been abandoned for several decades, and as of earlier this month, it is now owned by the city of New York, and it's going to let us implement this really big, exciting project. Yeah, that's exciting. So yeah, it's been a long time coming. And that long time coming has really been spearheaded by a group of dedicated advocates who have ensured that the city didn't forget about this project. Those groups, key ones like Bronx Council for Environmental Quality, Harlem River Working Group, have really made sure that there's been steady, consistent pressure on the city to not forget about this project that is a really big picture, transformational kind of thing. But one reason why it's taken so long is that not all the steps were always in the city's direct control for implementation, such as purchasing this property that was owned by a private railroad company. They had to be willing to come to the table and meet us halfway to get that sale through. So for the, honestly, decades, when we were waiting from the idea coming to fruition to actually being able to purchase it, it was groups like these dedicated advocates that helped push the city to keep making small milestones of progress. So that way one day, all the dominoes could be lined up when the opportunity arose that the project could be implemented. One of those key milestones was 2011. These same advocates pushed the city, pushed the Parks Department to go through a process with City Council, a ULURP action, just to get the authority to one day in the future, hopefully, be able to purchase the property and map it as parkland. But that step was completed in 2011. And with that, once the opportunity arose to purchase it, the city was able to make those moves. So I'm not saying that this project takes a long time to throw cold water on anyone's head about, seeing big transformational changes in New York City happen quickly. I certainly want that to be the case, but not every project is the same. Sometimes it requires constant, steady pressure from advocate groups to ensure that the city doesn't just shelve something when not all the pieces are in front of us right at that time. So I just want to give a big shout out to those advocate groups who have been so instrumental in making this project happen. And in this photo here, you see a group This was from a walking tour that we did with a special committee that Parks and DEP stood up for the Tibbetts project called the Tibbetts Advisory Group. It's composed of those dedicated advocates that have been part of the project for so long and local residents around Kingsbridge who are really interested and concerned about how this project would be shaped, how it might change their community, and help give us really important cues and information about how to design it, where the access points should be, and just making sure we are addressing concerns along the way. So let me talk about the two big things that this project is doing. First, on the water quality side. DEP has a legal mandate to clean up the city's streams, rivers, bays, oceans, and one way they can do that is through this concept called daylighting. On the left here, you see the squiggly line. That's the historic course of Tibbetts Brook. It used to run at the surface from Westchester down through the Bronx, through Van Cortlandt Park, wound its way through Kingsbridge, and emptied into the Harlem River at Marble Hill. But in the early 20th century, there was a decision by the city to put that water into a brick sewer, or into a sewer pipe underneath Broadway. Fine, great decision at the time, maybe. It allowed for development to occur, new houses to be built, businesses, extension of the subway. Didn't seem like a big deal at the time, seemed like progress. However, 100+ years later, obviously the city has continued to develop, less pervious surfaces, and now those hundreds of miles of upstate watershed enter this Broadway sewer pipe with all the sewage connections that also come from these homes and businesses. When it's a heavy rainfall event, there's not enough capacity. That sewage is no longer going to the wastewater treatment plants because they're over capacity, and it's going straight into the Harlem River. And we just shouldn't accept that in the city. So what we're gonna do here with this dotted line to the right is the rough course of this new surface level stream we're gonna create. We're gonna take that water out of the Broadway sewer, put it into the daylight, daylighting Tibbetts Brook. And it's going to create so much additional capacity, 215 to 220 million gallon annual reduction in combined sewer overflows. So that's sewage not going into the Harlem River, but instead going to the wastewater treatment plant as it should, cleaning up our waterways. But of course, this is not a combined sewer overflow panel discussion, so let's talk about the Greenway. The graphic's a little fuzzy, so I'll describe it. What we're creating here is a 1 mile extension further south of the Putnam Greenway. And if you haven't been to the Putnam Greenway yet, I urge you to go check it out. I think it's one of the most beautiful in the whole city. It starts at the southern end of Van Cortlandt Park and goes up to the city line and continues as a South County Trailway in Westchester further north. But it goes through this dense, beautiful forested area. It's gorgeous. So we'll be extending it about 1 mile south into the heart of Kingsbridge, which is great, not just because we're adding an extra mile of beautiful greenway path, but also because at the Parks Department, we care a lot about greenways, specifically for their ability to draw these big, large open spaces, these parks, further into these neighborhoods. What today might be like a 15 or a 20-minute walk for somebody living in Kingsbridge to get into Van Cortlandt Park, now could be a 3 or a 5-minute walk to get to one of these 4 new access points along the corridor, and then have a safe, protected, peaceful way to continue up into the park for other amenities or relaxation, or just enjoy their time on this new greenway. As somebody who works for the Parks Department, obviously I care about the reach of open spaces. I also live in a neighborhood where we don't have that many parks, and so I really understand how impactful it can be to make access to our open spaces simpler, easier, more reliable, more convenient. So that's what's really exciting about this project to me. But additionally, this greenway has some really important connections as well. Where it starts up there at that top circle is where the Empire State Trail really comes into the city. If you don't know about the Empire State Trail, it's a 750-mile route that New York State developed with municipalities across the state. It can take you all the way up to the Quebec line and all the way west to Ontario across the state. And so this is really strengthening that initial connection of the Empire State Trail into the city, which is great. Additionally, right where the project starts at that top dot is where the Mosholu-Pelham Greenway connects in and connects with the Putnam Greenway. So this will make connections even easier for people all over the city, especially in the western Bronx, to connect to that greenway and go east all the way to Pelham Bay Park, Bronx Park, other greenways across the borough. And then finally, work that Ted is about to share with you in a couple slides, how this project is really catalyzing further greenway development to the south along the Harlem River rights of way. And to just wrap up on Tibbetts, show you a few of these renderings and describe hopefully what the project will look like. On the left, this is inside of Van Cortlandt Park. We're at the south end of the park, looking north up the new Greenway. You see the Greenway path on the right, and then to the left is the stream corridor. It's honestly kind of obscured, kind of hard to see, but that's an exciting aspect of this project. Within the park, there's a lot of space to build this new stream. We'll have an actual floodplain that'll be planted. There's a lot of dense canopy, existing mature trees in the park right here. We're trying to design this in a way that will hopefully impact as little of that existing tree canopy and vegetation as possible. So hopefully when the thing is constructed, it'll look like the Greenway and the stream was just routed through like it was always meant to be there, rather than a fresh, clean, blank slate of new construction. And then on the right-hand side here, this is the Greenway path in the railroad corridor. This is the northern end of the corridor looking south, so right after you leave the park and enter the railroad. And you have the Greenway path on the right. The stream is obviously much more visible here on the left, but it's exciting because this is kind of a unique condition for Greenway paths in New York City. The Greenway will be up, supported on piles, running over the top of the stream. It'll be running below. You'll be able to kind of hear and see the water running alongside you as you're traveling down the Greenway. It's mostly a straight shot because this is a pretty narrow corridor, but we were able to design some meanders in the path to make it a little bit more visually interesting, to slow people down, as well as have these overlooks to take a minute to come off the path of travel and enjoy the scenery, enjoy the water running below you. With that, turn it over to Ted to talk about what happened south of here.
All right. I don't have any fancy renderings.
Not yet.
But I actually kind of feel like the bigger point here is how do you keep the ball rolling? Mitchell was talking about how advocates pushed many years ago for ULURP action. What we're trying to do at DOT is look at 7 miles of a corridor all along the waterfront. And kind of, in this case, each Greenway is a little bit different. In this case, we're actually trying to create a path that the community can build off of. There's not a lot of access to the waterfront at this point. Tibbetts is great, wonderful. But now I want to leverage that and try to make something out of it. The other thing with Tibbetts is also it's only one small sliver of land. It's not necessarily going to change the transportation network. It's actually kind of pinched in between some other development sites, et cetera. The renderings didn't show that though. As you guys know as architects. Anyway, one of the things that we do and what we're going through right now is Tibbetts is this line right here, along here. That's the Putnam Greenway. That Greenway is not going to be open 24 hours, it's not going to be open for a while. What can we do now to build off of it? This is what we're kind of playing with a little bit, and we've developed this thing called route alternatives. It's not perfect. We're not going to choose between each one of these. What we did is we came to the community and asked them how they feel about these routes. What that does is it kind of opens our palette, let's say, that allows us to kind of take some inspiration from what we hear from the community and wait to hear from, wait for other projects, wait for things to come up. We have all these streets. How are we going to leverage those and bring them into streets? Sorry, before I go there. See Broadway over here? It's under an elevated. Sedgwick goes over here, the Mosholu Greenway, really pretty. Bronx, what? Super hilly. Yeah, super hilly up here. But this goes along the reservoir, nice. But Bailey, that's what I'm going to talk about next. Bailey is a neighborhood corridor that I've already heard about is a safety issue. It's a wide street. It's nice. People in this neighborhood care very much about their street. I'm functioning under a Vision Zero mandate, meaning I got to make it safe for people. So now what I'm looking at, I look at these 3 different routes. Yeah, we have some movement on Broadway, but Bailey's the one that we really want to focus on. And so we look at, all right, how do we make this bigger? How do we pull in as many people as possible? And now what you see, that's Bailey there. This is what we're proposing for it. It's definitely not the renderings at all, what Mitchell showed you. But what it does create is that pathway and builds people's expectations and get people to understand what a greenway is. We've had greenways for years. If you look at the map that Hunter originally showed, they're all kind of spattered. The only real places where people do ride maybe Pelham, people don't even know where the Hutchinson is because it's so cut off from one another. So what we're trying to do is kind of put the pieces together. Even if it's bad pieces, still gonna fit them in there. We're gonna make it work. But this is actually kind of exciting. What's cool on the west sidewalk, it's gonna overlook the Deegan and this is where the Tibbetts Creek is. This right here is where Tibbetts is going to end. So we have to play with that. Like once again, not shown in the renderings, but in order to make people use a park, my agency needs to now come deal with this. So having the leverage of the route alternatives that we can then pull in makes a big difference and allows us to do kind of some of the stuff you've seen on the Brooklyn waterfront, which we all know happens for developers, et cetera, that different side of equity. But this, we really do need to find these leverage points where we can pull resources towards the project. Further down the route, this is one that we've been talking about a lot. This is the Depot Place Bridge, as it's called. State DOT built a bike path that's okay, not great, but they were kind of working with the community, kind of not. We're left with this right here is where the path is. What we're trying to do is build out this, which frankly I'm going to be changing this. All these things are drafts up here. But what we're going to try to do is put some Jersey barriers along here, along the outside, and create a shared use path that provides views and, more importantly, access to a parks project that's coming down here. So right now, if you guys were looking at this at a map, you would see all this parkland right next to Roberto Clemente Park, but then it just stops. And then you're left with this road, something that looks a little bit like this. So it might not seem like a lot. This might not seem like a lot, but it's a step in the right direction that gets people starting to ask for more, which is a good thing. Further down on the Bruckner Boulevard, ugly. The first time we even talked about this as a greenway, people were like, what are you talking about? We want it on the waterfront. Yeah, I want it on the waterfront too. But the waterfront has all sorts of other problems that I'll talk about in a second. One of the things that we're doing is we're trying to carve out a little bit of space here so we can provide access along the corridor. Some of the conflicts, we've got long-term plans. People are putting dotted lines on stuff, but guess what? A lot of this is private land, folks. And it's not going to be, it's navigable waterways. Anybody who works on large infrastructure projects knows that that's going to take some time to get through. So what we're trying to do here, I'm going to go back to this. We have a school here. Let's see if we can get some people riding on Bruckner Boulevard and starting to think about the land uses in a different way down there. Build it into the bikeway plan and keep building off of that. Long term, I guarantee you, 10 years from now, we're going to be talking about something like this. And hopefully, we'll be talking about building out here on this waterfront. All right, case study 2. That's leading.
Thanks, Ted. I'll provide just brief context about the Manhattan Waterfront Greenway before I pass it to Gentry to talk about the exciting project at Bobby Wagner Walk. So the Manhattan Waterfront Greenway, it's an important open space and transportation resource for the city, provides improved access to the city waterfront, integrates larger parks within a connected network, provides a bike path for both recreation and commuting. When complete, this is going to be a 32.5-mile loop around Manhattan that will run continuously around the island. We're 85% of the way there, but that 15% is still left to go. Building off of years of advocacy and planning, since Mayor Dinkins put forward a Greenway plan for New York City in 1993, which Hunter mentioned, our 3 agencies have worked on a lot of projects to close the loop, including projects like Waterside Pier, West Harlem Piers Park. As I mentioned earlier, in 2018, we jointly released a plan to close the remaining gaps in the Manhattan Waterfront Greenway, which are what you see here on this map. These are the remaining gaps for a reason. They're among the hardest to fill due to a lack of existing waterfront land. You all know where the FDR and Harlem River Drive is relative to the gaps that you see here, difficult topography, other challenges that make these really hard to pull together, but we're currently working on planning, design, or construction to close all of them. The East Midtown segment, which is located from 50th 3rd Street to 61st Street. It's the first of the gaps that we included in that 2018 plan to open, which it did in December 2023. Due to a lack of waterfront land in this location, EDC, Parks, our partners, including Gentry Entertainment, Stantec, built this segment. It's 0.6 miles. It's a really innovative project that's built outboard on piers in the water. And to provide a transition to Gentry's project, alongside our efforts to fill these remaining gaps, which I've talked about, on behalf of Parks, we're also working to improve existing portions of the Greenway that need it most. And one of those is the segment that Gentry will talk about in East Harlem. I'll pass it to you.
All right, thanks, Lena. Okay, so the 107th Street Pier and Bobby Wagner Walk project, this segment that I'm going to speak to today extends from East 94th Street to 107th Street, and it includes the pier at 107th Street. And then there's a gap, and then it picks up again from 117th Street to 124th Street. The implementing agency for this project, as Lena mentioned, is EDC in partnership with the Parks Department. And then so the scope of the project really is to rehab and rehab and reconstruct the Esplanade and completely demolish the existing pier at 107th Street and rebuild it into a new one. The graphic that you see here kind of shows all of the various projects as part of the Manhattan Greenway that are happening adjacent to the Bobby Wagner Walk project. So at 94th Street, you have the project, it's called the Phase 3 project that connects to the Bobby Wagner Walk project at 94th Street. The Bobby Wagner Walk project, by the way, is called Phase 4 on here. And then there's another section called Phase 2 that is from 114th Street to 117th Street, which will connect to the northern portion of our project. And then the Manhattan Greenway Harlem River project, which EDC is also managing, starts at 125th Street and goes up the Harlem River. So those are kind of all of the various connections. All of those are further along in design, and actually they're in procurement, and some of them are about ready to start construction soon or have started construction. So they will be built or constructed by the time we come in to construct the Bobby Wagner Walk project. Okay, so one thing, let me go back one more, because you might be noticing that there's a missing gap here. So from 107th Street to 114th Street, I didn't mention that area, and that is because that is actually not funded right now. The reason for that being is there was an inspection done of all of the bulkheads and the structures along the East River back in 2019, and there was a kind of a priority list of things that needed to get reconstructed and rebuilt right away. Bobby Wagner Walk, or at least the sections that are in our scope, were rated as in basically poor to severe condition and needed to be addressed immediately. The section between 107th and 114th was kind of a lower priority because it's wasn't as in deteriorating condition. So it's really just kind of a priority of what can be funded the quickest. So just walking through some of the existing condition photos here, I mentioned that report rated the Esplanade and the platforms and the gravity walls that the Esplanade sits on as poor to severe condition. Many of these areas are completely fenced off. Here you can see that there's sinkholes on the Esplanade. There's various locations where that happens. The pier is completely closed off from the public right now just because it's in such terrible shape and is just is more of a safety hazard than anything. So completely cut off from the public. And then Another issue that we have here is the width of the Esplanade. So Lena mentioned, the FDR highway kind of just runs up along this whole thing, and there's areas where it immediately butts up next to our project. And there are areas of our project that the Esplanade is as the width is as little as 8 to 9 feet in a few areas. And here's another section that's in the northern area. This is about a 10 to 11 feet wide section of the Esplanade as well. Most of the Esplanade looks like this, though, where there's kind of a varying width. Still not very wide, but not as narrow as those other ones. But you can see here, most of the Esplanade, there's fencing along the sea rail because the seawall is in deteriorating condition, and so it's just to fence off the area. And then there's a lot of spalling concrete. A lot of the trees are in poor health, and there's a non-compliant FDR barrier along the FDR as well. And then this is just a photo of kind of the one area where it widens out at the very northern part of our project at 124th Street. And this section will connect to the project to the north. So Marvel Architects and Melissa Johnson led our community engagement process. The community engagement process was more active and robust than most of the typical projects we do with the city. We did have, an online survey. We had informational meetings. We've had 2 workshops with them so far, both offered as virtual or in person, just to help with getting a broader reach to the community. We hosted a walkthrough event with the community of the site, hosted some pop-up events as well. And then, of course, we've been to a few community board meetings as well. So with collecting all of those responses and feedback from the community, there were really some key takeaways that we received. For the Esplanade, they want to see a separated bike path wherever possible. That's going to be a challenge with the width in some of the areas, but that is something that they really do want. They want a lot of tree canopy, lots of green space, native plantings, a vegetative buffer, kind of to help buffer the FDR from the park, and then lots of various types of seating. For the pier, they'd like to see a shade structure, some space for gathering areas, seating. They want space for, to be conducive for fishing, and then just education around to provide education around kind of ecological enhancements that we could provide in this area. So after gathering all of the feedback from the community, we developed these design goals that aligned with the project's goals, the community and the community's feedback, while taking into consideration the constraints of the project. We wanted to have a vibrant park with lots of activity, lots of various types of seatings and other amenities, and by using the Greenway to connect these various recreational activities. We wanted the Esplanade to be accessible. Access is an issue here as well, which I'll get into here in a little bit. We're also designing for sea level rise for the year 2100. And then we want to promote in-water habitat, and incorporate native species. And the last one the city has been moving more towards is the sustainability aspect of reducing our carbon footprint by minimizing the waste where possible, so reducing the amount of waste that goes into landfills, minimizing the use of virgin materials, and recycling as much as possible. So aligning the project's goals and the community's desires with these constraints of the project is kind of the goal that we have to try to come up with what we want here. The constraints really being about access and width. Access, the only at-grade entrance to this esplanade of this section is at 96th Street. There's also, you could also access it via pedestrian bridges from 103rd Street, 111th Street, and 120th Street. These are pretty far apart, so access from the neighborhood is a challenge, but also just movement and access through the esplanade itself is a challenge. When you walk the esplanade, you will, once you get up to about 114th Street, it's completely fenced off and you can't walk any further. You have to walk back down to the 11th Street, the 111th Street pedestrian bridge, walk over, or sorry, 111th Street pedestrian bridge, walk over it, and then walk through the neighborhood, and then back to the 120th Street ped bridge, walk back over, and then walk further north, where it's fenced off again at 125th Street, and it's a complete dead end, and then you have to walk back again. So right now, it's not continuous, but I think with all of the projects that are happening along the east side, the goal is that this will be continuous. Hopefully in a few years, that will happen. And then I mentioned the width issue too, where we have real pinch points along this area. All right, so the design parameters established are really based on the width of the esplanade, with the overarching goal to have as much planting and as much shade as possible, with a lot of options for seating as well. And so we developed these parameters where we did feel that it was important to have separated bike paths, because if you ever walk along this area, cyclists really go quite fast, and you have pedestrians kind of sharing the same space. So having a separated bike path was important, but you can't have a separated bike path when the esplanade is only 10 feet wide. So we established these design parameters where we have an esplanade that's less than 30 feet. It will be a shared use path with a planting buffer that buffers the highway, and then where it's greater than 30 feet, you'll have a separated bike path with a 4-foot planting buffer. You'll have a larger planting median that separates the bikeway from the esplanade. And then of course have seating along that way too. And then other various activities. And then of course with all of this, we're raising the existing esplanade 2 to 3 feet to account for sea level rise. So it will be approximately 2 to 3 feet higher than the FDR is today. All right, so starting from the south side, this is at 96th Street. This is our only at-grade entrance. This is also an area where it's quite narrow, so we have a shared use path in this area, but we have to also, because we're raising the esplanade 2 to 3 feet, we do have to ramp down to 96th Street to meet grade there. So in this proposal, we are keeping the esplanade high, but then we have ramps that extend down to 96th Street. And then when you move north, it does get wide enough to have a separated bike path. And then where is this? This is at 101st Street, I believe. The community wanted to have some opportunities to have it over water, like areas that extended over water, kind of these smaller pier areas. So we proposed some smaller bump outs that extend over the water. And then as you move north, we have various activities along the way too, like this musical interactive play area. And then the pier, was designed, so we worked with Marble Architects on the design and the shape of the pier. And so what you see here is quite a different shape than what's existing today, which is just a rectangular shape. But this also promotes kind of this, we have 2 different access points to the pier at this area, and then in between you'll see that, in this triangular space, there's kind of an area where we're gonna have opportunity to provide some ecological enhancements as well. And then we're also working with an artist on this project, and they will be providing some, or designing some integrated art along the Esplanade that's kind of within these two different entrance points. All right, so this is the design of the proposed pier here. And when we zoom in, this is looking at the Esplanade, looking back towards the pier, kind of that secondary entrance, which is what we call the picnic bridge, because there's picnic tables on this area, and it extends onto the pier. And then when you're on the pier, there's gathering space, there's a shade structure, we have kind of two different levels of the piers, and it's made up in grade change by the amphitheater style seating that is here as well. At the tip of the pier, we really wanted this area to be kind of open for the views, because there are quite good views here. So this is an area with lots of different types of seating, and that's just open to the views that you have. And this is looking back south at the Ward's Island pedestrian bridge. So then you jump up to the northern section of our project. And this is we're providing another one of those bump outs in the river. These are also used for turnarounds for maintenance vehicles too, which is also kind of the secondary purpose of them. But this is in an area, again, where we have a shared use path. When we make our way north, this is the very northern section of the project where we come back down to grade and meet the project to the north. And it widens out quite a bit in this area, so we have room for a small park that also has a separated bike path, picnic area, and lawn space. And it's uniquely wide, so we're able to also provide a lot of shade trees as well. So that's really kind of the full extent of the project. We were able to get about 40% of the length of the project is separated bike paths, which is a good, decent amount. I mean, because we're going from separated to shared use to separated to shared use, you would think maybe that's a little confusing or a little, too much, but where we have those separated bike paths, it's probably about a 2 to 3 city block length, so they're actually quite long lengths that we were able to get these separated bike paths in there. Oh, and here's the last image that we have of that widened area. So we presented to the community board in April, and it was very well received. We really made sure when we presented the design to them that we reminded them of the robust community engagement that happened on this project. We wanted to remind them that we heard them, we heard what they said, we listened, and we were really trying hard to respond to their feedback on what exactly they want to see for this park and greenway. This project is also in an environmental justice area, and this community has not felt in the past that the city has invested a lot in their neighborhoods. So I think it was really great that we presented this design and just to see that they reacted positively to it. So with that, I mean, our project is currently in design right now. We're in final design, which should be wrapping up in early 2025. And then we'll start construction later in 2025 or 2026. So stay tuned.
First, since we're discussing equity and greenways, I wanted to first kind of start, and hopefully everyone will be pretty brief in their answers, but with our 3 agencies here, New York City Parks, DOT, and EDC, is there anything within your respective agencies, are there equity goals? Okay, that one's on. Thanks.
Yeah, just hold the mic close so that blind people can hear.
Got it. Okay, thanks. Are there equity goals within your agencies that maybe you didn't already present in the previous discussion? So, Mitchell, we'll start with you.
Make sure this is long enough. New York City Parks has lots of equity goals. I would say that none of them are directly created for greenways specifically, But in particular, one metric that we use is what we call walk to a park. Like I mentioned in the Tibbetts case study, we don't just think about extending greenways across the city, but we think about how greenways can expand access to open space deeper into neighborhoods that are a little further away from an existing park. So this walk to a park metric that we have is a goal to have 85% of the city population living within a 10-minute walk to a park by 2030. And so this is a mapping tool that we use, and all of our investments that we seek and capital projects that we pursue and prioritize, this is one of our main drivers to decide, is this a project that we would think is worthwhile right now? Will it reduce that gap? Will it bring more of the city's population that isn't currently within a 10-minute walk to a park into that walk to a park? Additionally, we have a big program called Community Parks Initiative. It's about kind of just refreshing your local neighborhood parks all across the city, and we prioritize funding for that system through a combination of metrics. Is this neighborhood growing? Is this neighborhood's income at or below average for the city? Is this neighborhood, has it had recent park investment in the last couple of decades? And we try to, again, prioritize those investments in those places where those three metrics are all being met.
Great, thanks. Lena.
Yeah, I think relative to Parks and DOT, EDC's mission is as broad as economic development is. Greenways, I think, really relate to two of a larger set of our strategic priorities: to deliver sustainable infrastructure for communities and to build neighborhoods as places to live, learn, work, and play. I think we really see greenways as a multi-purpose economic infrastructure. So equity to us is really about expanding access to the benefits they provide, particularly, the power to connect neighborhoods, job centers, other places people want to go, in addition to the things that we all love about greenways. But I think within that economic development context, that connectivity is really what is our bread and butter.
Yeah, makes sense.
A lot of our work involves these things called priority investment areas. You guys should go look at the streets plan online. In fact, it's not really Harlem River, to tell you the truth. That's not one of the places that pops up. But a lot of the work that I do as the director of the bicycle program is about getting safety and green infrastructure in neighborhoods that literally haven't had any. So we're given that directive, whether or not it's easy to install them. You guys hear about a lot of the conflicts that we have out there. So these things only go so far. We really do need to have strong leadership, and I'll leave it at that.
And Edmundo, as a community member, is there anything that hasn't been said that you would want to see perhaps for your work in the Bronx or other communities?
No, I think just the biggest challenge is often the communication with community members. I have a great privilege that I have a job that allows me to be involved and take advantage. I think one of the benefits of COVID was the virtual aspect of getting to have these conversations where in the past it would have happened in some nonprofit or agency's office in the middle of the day. Now there's later meetings in the day, there's virtual, you can kind of tap in from anywhere. And, it's really like that outreach that I think that's where outreach costs money, because that's people spending time knocking on doors, going to the businesses. So, that's where these agencies getting budgeted to have the kind of staff that they need, to have the actual conversations with people to kind of get them to where they got to go. And the understanding, me and Ted have bumped heads numerous times, but we both want the same thing. It's just a matter of understanding from each of our perspectives, how do we get to that goal, and then just going from there.
Thank you. And Gentry, as a consultant, how do you feel like you all sort of translate the agency goals? Do they feel clear when you take on a project? Are they written into the scope of work?
Yeah, they're written. Well, some of them are written in the scope. I'm not. Yeah, I mean, I think they're pretty clear. But sometimes there's things like, like in the RFP for Bobby Wagner Walk, it said we think we should design for sea level rise. Well, we didn't say we think, but design for sea level rise. We to the elevation probably 9 to 11. But what do you, so they want you to study that, but then at the same time, the HATS report came out from, or HATS study came out from Army Corps. It's like, well, they're saying something else, so what are we, so a lot of times it's really just agencies' goals are in conflict with each other, so we try to maneuver that. So in the end, we just ask, EDC what they want us to do on that, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Lena, I'm going to pick on you for a minute. Something that you said really jumped out to me when you were talking about the East Midtown Greenway, which is stunning. Gentry worked on this. You mentioned that it was designed in that way because there was not sort of sufficient space for a waterfront greenway. I'm paraphrasing what you said a little bit. And I think we would all probably agree there are many places in New York City where there's not sort of sufficient space for a waterfront greenway. So I'm curious, sort of within EDC or other city agencies that you all work with, how is a decision made to kind of invest in, a sort of separate in the water, bridge basically in one location maybe, and perhaps not in others?
Oh, sorry. No, you're all good. I think the first thing that I'll touch on is that, and I think we've mentioned in different contexts how long these sort of really bold ideas like building a greenway out in the water take. Like design for the East Midtown Greenway began in 2017. The project just finished in 2023. That already feels like a long timeline, but the planning and permitting, which is for waterfront access especially, really significant, started in the early 2010s. So I think when we think about these big moves, they're often decades in the making. And building along waterfronts is just really challenging. And it's hard to, from often when we're doing it, we're improving bulkheads, which are often in poor condition, in addition to building the beautiful accessible greenway on top. And between that, the permitting, if you're close to a navigable waterway, I think as you mentioned, Ted, things even become more complicated. So it really is a process of figuring out where that those sort of bold in-water solutions are needed, because there's an FDR that is sometimes itself on piers in the water, or what the topography looks like, or what the permitting, where the navigable waterways are. So it's sort of that mix of where it's needed, and then that sort of long process of getting us there.
And just to add to that, Lena, I think East Midtown Greenway is one example where there was a piece of infrastructure that was already there. So there was this like secret opportunity that somebody planned for well in advance when the FDR had to go in construction to put that outer detour roadway with the piles and stuff out there. There was that opportunity to move on that one when the West Side Highway collapsed decades ago. There was that opportunity to rebuild. So not like we need to wait for disasters or wait for these surprise things to happen, but also identifying these pieces of infrastructure that maybe 10, 20 years down the road aren't really going to be needed in the same way, and make plans for them now. Like, what is the vision and how do we enact that vision down the road? They do take a long time sometimes for these big, massive transformations.
We often say there's like no new projects, but just the right time for them. And I think as you were talking about Tibbetts, getting things in place to move when the time is right is the unseen but very important part of our work.
I kind of want to highlight something that she said that I think is very important, especially when this work is getting done in neighborhoods that have been underserved or neglected. The planning of that greenway, those conversations were happening in 2010. In 2010, everybody here, especially Ted, could highlight the Bronx looked totally different when it came to cycling infrastructure or the types of pedestrian infrastructure. So then some of the areas where the challenges really lie is, all right, these things take about 10 to 15 years of conversation, planning, and all of this, but I want what everyone else got right now. That's where it's the hard part. So when you're telling folks on the Harlem River, like, hey, we could build this out, and they see the East River stuff, they see the Brooklyn, Queens waterfront, they see the landing out in Long Island City, they're like, I don't want to wait for 15 years of conversation. It's not that people here have that control, but they like, if you can build that there, we want the same thing. We don't want to build out. So that's where like a lot of the challenges happens, because then folks will be like, I don't want to mess with DOT. I don't want to mess with this org. I don't want to mess with that agency because they're not doing what I want, not understanding the bureaucratic process. But for instance, like with the Bobby Wagner Walk, where you are building out this area, but this little section didn't get prioritized to the same extent. So we're not going to build that right now. But when you look at it, it's like, well, it makes sense to build it now because you're building everything else. So can we skip that step of bureaucracy that this wasn't as severe, and let's make this one continuous greenway so we don't have to have construction 5 years into a new greenway or 10 years later when the greenway that's built already is now deteriorating and now we got this new portion.
Thank you. So that kind of leads to another question that I have, and then we'll take questions from you because I know we want to wrap things up fairly soon, but we're all going to be sticking around for, I think there's some food or a reception nearby. So Mitchell, you gave kind of a shout out to the advocates. So I know Edmundo and I liked hearing that, and how advocates played a significant role in Tibbetts Brook. So is there any advice that you would have? I feel like everyone who lives in New York is an advocate. We all have things that we want to see happen to improve our city. What kind of advice would you give us to help advance the New York that we want to see as it relates to greenways?
I mean, I guess kind of not just being a singular advocate or 2 or 3 people with the same idea, but telling your friends and getting them involved and trying to create consistent messages that sound the same to the agencies. That way it's not ping, 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 and being hit with all these different ideas from all these different people that sound a little bit differently, but like speaking with one voice is obviously much more powerful when that's the same voice heard by a lot of people coming to the agency consistently.
Ted, is there anything you would add to that?
It kind of strikes me a little bit about what Edmundo was saying, that like these things take time, and I always tell people that are younger than me, I'm getting up there, I just turned 50 this year, big milestone. And some of the younger folks on my staff in particular, they very much want to see stuff done right now. And it's our job as bureaucrats to manage those expectations. And I'm actually like, it sounds like I'm being kind of like emphasizing the bureaucratic side, just being realist here. And like sometimes what Ed wants isn't what he can get. You can't get it, sorry. I was around in the East Midtown section literally in 2001 when the UN was saying, no, you can't do it because of security. Changes all the time. Answers change all the time. It's about setting expectations to people and then managing those expectations so you can get something. I'll tell you right now that like that never would have happened if we didn't build that protected bike lane on 2nd Avenue and show people everything. And this was something that we talked, Donna was in meetings with me about this. We talked about the numbers of people would use that greenway on the East Midtown. You didn't have that leverage back in 1982 or whatever it was. Like, that wasn't it. So, like, you gotta work, you gotta have ideology. That's great, love it. But don't let that get in the way of what you're trying to do right now. Because, like, I really do feel like advocates need to create a big tent, all right? They need to create that space, fine. But when we start kind of subverting the actual things that can happen, instead of going for what you can get right now, that's where we fail. I personally really feel like that. So I know that the Brooklyn Waterfront Greenway, I was involved in it since the beginning, like not the very beginning, but very close. Like without those lanes out there, we would have never gotten lanes in Brooklyn Bridge Park. Believe it. Like that's all the younger staff they don't get that. Sorry, I'm gonna complain. I haven't used the word millennial yet. But no, but like seriously, that it's really important to understand that those little things that we build allow for the larger projects, and we have to keep that in mind. Sorry.
And I'll be super brief so we could have a conversation with y'all. I think something that you're highlighting right now was really something that was highlighted in the ULI report, which is roles. One of the things that I've always appreciated about having these meetings with Ted is that he's been very candid with me. He doesn't tell me what I want to hear and then go and do something else. I appreciate you for that, and that's sometimes also not common. But for some other folks, that's not good enough, so then they don't even want to have those conversations. I have the patience where I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to go with as far as he's going to let me go, but I'm going to take what these people want and continue to push for that, so then we can have that eventual push. But it takes political will, because the agencies can only do but so much, and how do you push electeds? Is with people. So you got to kind of really find this delicate balance of how you get people not to get burnt out. Like a lot of the stuff that I'm advocating for and fighting for in my neighborhood was being fought for 20, 30 years ago. Still not fully funded, still not completed. Designs are still being talked about. And I'm fortunate enough that I can talk to some of these folks and kind of get that institutional legacy knowledge while also having conversations with people in the agencies to continue that push.
Thanks. Lena, is there anything you would like to add before we take a question from the audience?
I think to what everyone said, where EDC comes in is after all of that amazing advocacy and the bike lanes on 2nd Avenue are built, and it's time for that sort of that big, exciting East Midtown Greenway, and that's where we tend to come in to make that a reality. But we wouldn't be able to do that work without everything that builds up to it.
Thank you. Does anyone here have a question for our panel? Let's see, you in the white blouse. Yeah.
So I have, is this on?
We can hear you.
I have a question, an observation, and an objection. And I'll start with the observation, which I had to write this down, there's so much. I noticed that harkening back to the earliest slides, that almost all of the proposed greenway development is, I'm going to call it coastal. It's along the waterways, and that's a wonderful thing. But none of the objectives even mention that. So I wonder if it's just an implicit assumption, or where's the explicit portion of that? And I say this as a cyclist and a kayaker and a community advocate. So it's absolutely awesome, but it just seems like hidden. So that's the observation. The question is whether, since we all know it takes an enormous amount of time, and we already have this huge multiplicity of transportation modes, right? We have this brand new-ish, right, electric assist, I think we call it, mode. And it's as fast or faster than vehicular traffic, but it's incredibly dangerous to human power. And I think we gotta build in for that now, because it's not going away. And I mean, my personal opinion is, with all the 236 east-west and the 12 or 15, whatever it is, northwest, I don't see why all of them have to be accessible to everybody in the first place, right? Like, give every 10th to the cyclist, give every 20th to pedestrian only. You know, I don't see why we're all trying to share everything when we could striate. And so my question, what was my question? I guess my question is anybody interested in that? And last thing, sorry, is the objection, which is that East River, I feel it's sort of a Ptolemaic project, because the real problem is the FDR. And unfortunately, it's not elevated, so we can't let a truck fall through it, right? But you can only get there every 10, 20 blocks. You don't even know what those blocks are. There's no signage. Why the hell is anybody going to want to go there? It's only 6 feet wide, and I can see the river down there. And this home, I mean, it's like, of all the bazillion things we can do, why are we drawing pretty pictures about that? The DOT has the muscle and the money, and those bike paths are what has really changed. And as far as EDC, City Bike. So that's where, and honestly, that drawing, that design proposal, this is the objection part, it's nowhere near what Dumbo has. Oh my God, it's all concrete, and nobody's gonna want that in the first place.
I think we're
Those
gonna...
bump outs are turnarounds.
Ted, I know you were gonna answer part of that.
I mean, I think it's pretty much a DOT question. Sorry for being clear. Like, access is important in the Manhattan street grid. From what your idea, I would like to think that the street life in New York is what makes New York special, and banning people from streets, we're actually kind of going in the other way. and looking at shared spaces. So just something like look up by north of the Flatiron on what we're doing with Broadway up there. That's probably more of where it's going. We do what you're talking about. It's definitely what we're struggling with. But the latter question about, what was it? Was, I didn't think you actually, what was it? The FDR. Oh, the FDR? Like, I mean, I do feel, as somebody, once again, to talk about the UN back in the day, like we never thought we were going to get that. I have a feeling we're going to get that eventually. I've seen the numbers, I've looked in the projections. They don't account, they literally, fighting 10 years ago with people saying, there's no way you can sustain 8% growth of modal shift. We've sustained it and blown it away every single year. And politicians will keep on fighting about it, but I guarantee you, the next design, is it can't have a shared use path. It can't have 6 feet. It's not going to. We're gonna get pushback on that. And yeah, that's
okay. Something for us to work on. Let's take one more question. Maybe a
Hi everyone, my name is Alexis Vasquez. I represent the Harlem River Working Group. And tonight I ask you, the program tonight was about equity in terms of greenway development. And yet the Harlem River Greenway is mainly planned as an on-street greenway, while the East River, Queens Waterfront, and Manhattan Greenway are built on the waterfront. How is this equitable?
the Queens East River, it isn't all on the waterfront. It was a development property that basically Empire State built out. They're facing all the same problems. The basic problem, and I think it kind of gets to what you were saying, the Major Deegan Expressway. It's the way infrastructure was built. If we could tear down the Major Deegan Expressway, sure, let's go at it. It's fun. We could probably have a really cool studio on what you could do with that, and it would be beautiful to see up front. But we can't just tell all those cars. I know where you live, somewhere up there in the Bronx.
I'm a Bronx resident.
Right. So where do you want more cars driving down your street?
I want them everywhere.
Well, no, what I'm saying, though, is if you tear down the Deegan, all those cars are going to go somewhere.
Right.
That's my point. So you have to work based on that.
Do any other panelists? Oh, go for it.
No, so I appreciate the answer and the question. So like one of the stuff that I struggle with is like how are those other areas developed differently? Like how is that Queens waterfront developed looking very differently than other area waterfronts? Or just like certain parks, you'll go to different parks and you could tell by the zip code or the medium income, they look very, very, no, of course the South Bronx is getting developed, but a lot of it's done by.
It's getting developed like that. It's getting developed almost exactly like it. Esplanade out there, just like.
Where we talk, the private developers, but that's.
Also private. It's also private on that.
But that's the question that I'm being very candid. Like for instance, when you go to Long Island City and you see that, I see Parks Department, I see all these other agencies there, and that doesn't look like some of the waterfront that we have currently or there are conversations to be having. And this is not a shot, it's just a legit. So I'm like, my question is like, how is it that these projects look so different in different boroughs being run by the same agencies?
For someone, Lena, would you like to answer that, or Mitchell?
Well, Ted mentioned this a second ago, the different conditions, the types of infrastructure that are on those shorelines already. The Bronx Harlem River shoreline, you do have the Major Deegan running right alongside it. You got the Oak Point rail line running right alongside it. There is no highway right along the side of the Long Island City waterfront. So those big pieces of infrastructure are there, and it causes slightly different conditions in different parts of the city. But I am hopeful we could, in the Queens waterfront planning, get as much along the waterfront as possible. It's not all going to be on the waterfront. Same with the Brooklyn Waterfront Greenway. Not all of it is on the waterfront. There's always areas where you got to go inland for a little bit, make it as nice as you can on those inland portions, and then when the opportunity arises, when the ingredients are right, you can make big infrastructural moves and create these outboard things. But it does depend a lot on the existing conditions that are already there and how difficult those things are to move versus places where they just aren't there currently.
Yeah, I think the land ownership is also a huge part. I would love for us to for the city to have a policy where X amount of space on the shoreline, regardless of whether it's private owned, public owned, whatever, is dedicated for public waterfront. That's not what we have right now. You know, and so it's working with what we've got right now as we push for those big things that we'd all like to see.
Thank you. I know it's past 7:30. I think this program is supposed to end at that time. I do want to put in a plug for the next New York City Greenway Summit. Will be September 19th and September 20th. I think this group will be back, possibly in this very room, discussing updates on what we're working on, and with more time. So we hope all of you all will sort of be part of this movement that we're working on, and advocating and working with our agencies, since all of these things take a lot of time and public support. So thank you, AIA, and I think we can stick around for questions. Individual.
Thank you for all the participants and the audience, both online and in person. It's a great discussion. Thanks again.